Have you ever asked yourself, why do most strokes affect the face and arms more than the legs? The answer to this lies within the territory of the middle cerebral artery. Hi, it's Dr. Kenny and welcome back to Neurosketch with Dr. Kenny, and today we are taking a closer look of the middle cerebral artery, the biggest branch of the internal carotid artery. So let's go. The middle cerebral artery is one of the branch of the internal carotid artery, but it's the biggest branch of the internal carotid artery. So remember, the internal carotid artery will terminate by forming two terminal branches. That will be the anterior cerebral artery and the middle cerebral artery. So the middle cerebral artery is the biggest of the branches of the internal carotid artery. So the middle cerebral artery, after it branches off from the internal carotid artery, it goes to within the Sylvian fissure, the lateral sulcus of Sylvian, whereby it gives two terminal branches within the Sylvian fissure, and that would be the superior division of the middle cerebral artery and the inferior division of the middle cerebral artery. So it gives two terminal branches within the Sylvian fissure. And lastly, the superior division of the middle cerebral artery will supply structures above the Sylvian fissure, and the inferior division will supply structures below the Sylvian fissure. So those are the two terminal branches of the middle cerebral artery. But before it gives it the terminal branches, it gives why it travels now to find the lateral sulcus of Sylvian. It gives the smaller branches that we call them the lenticulostriate arteries. The lenticulostriate arteries are the smaller branches of the middle cerebral artery as it goes. So these lenticulostriates, so they are lenticular. Now remember, lenticular, so it supplies the lentiform nucleus. You remember what lentiform nucleus is. Lenticular for lentiform nucleus, and the striate for striatum. So striate for striatum, I think you can now remember. So this is to say that the middle cerebral artery also will supply these deep structures within, the basoganglia system, the deep structures within the brain. And it also gives the branch to supply the lateral surfaces or the lateral surface, by superior division and the inferior division of the middle cerebral artery. So let's see a closer, takes a closer look on this middle cerebral artery. So the middle cerebral artery, as we have said, within the Sylvian fissure, it gives two terminal branches. This is the middle cerebral artery, so it gives the superior division of the middle cerebral artery that will go to supply the upper part of above the Sylvian fissure, and also it has got also the inferior division that will come to supply the structures below the Sylvian fissure. So in snapshot, it's like the middle cerebral artery will supply all this part over here. All this part over here will be supplied by the middle cerebral artery. So, and this is what we were talking about. So the middle cerebral artery will supply this yellowish maybe surface here. So all the way from the frontal lobe, parietal lobe, and the temporal lobe. So the frontal, parietal, and temporal lobe on this side will be supplied by the middle cerebral artery. So it supplies most of the lateral surface of the cerebral hemisphere, except a narrow strip above here, which you remember now this strip was supplied by the anterior cerebral artery, and it also does not supply this part over here because this part is being supplied by the posterior cerebral arteries. So let's take a closer look at the deep structures that are supplied by the middle cerebral artery. So the middle cerebral artery, as we have said, before it goes to give two terminal branches, it gives smaller branches, and these branches we call them the lenticulostriate arteries, and we know that it supplies the lentiform nucleus and the striatum. So at least this part of the lentiform nucleus at the striatum, because you remember this part, the I don't know, bluish part was supplied by the anterior cerebral artery. Remember, we have to go back to the previous video, and so it supplied this part of the deep territories within the basal ganglia. So yeah, it supplied the part of the basal ganglia and the internal capsule as well. So let's take the coronal section through the brain to see what are the structures that will be supplied by middle cerebral artery. So the middle cerebral artery, now this is the coronal section, it will supply all the way from here to here. So anything that falls under this region will be supplied by the middle cerebral artery. Anything that falls under this region here will be supplied by the middle cerebral artery, at least on the superficial part. But on the deep surface, now the deep structures, the middle cerebral artery will supply this part. And you know that we'll have the caudate nucleus somewhere around here. We have the internal capsule here, and we have the lentiform nucleus somewhere around here. So the middle cerebral artery will supply all of these parts, all of those parts. And when you take now the horizontal section, what we see is the middle cerebral artery will supply from this part here, which is anteriorly. So this is the anterior part of the brain, this is the posterior part. So this will be the frontal lobe, and this will be the occipital lobe. So the middle cerebral artery, it supplies all the way from here to here. So you see how wide the territory of the middle cerebral artery is. So it supplies all the way from here to here. So it supplies the bigger part of the cerebral hemisphere, on the lateral surface, except, as I've said, except the narrow strip on that will be supplied by the anterior cerebral artery, and the narrow strip on the posterior side, which will be supplied by the posterior cerebral arteries. I think now it's fair when we go to discuss the clinical significance or clinical correlation of the middle cerebral artery. First thing first, strokes or infarction along the territories of the middle cerebral arteries are more common than any other arteries of the brain. The infarction on the middle cerebral artery, the infarction on the territories of the middle cerebral artery is more common than any other parts of the middle or any other parts of the brain, any other parts of any other arteries, the anterior and the posterior cerebral artery. I think partly is because the middle cerebral artery will supply the most of at a bigger part. It supplies the brain at the bigger part than any other arteries. An example to this is assuming Tanzania. So assuming Tanzania is maybe the 90% of the population in Tanzania are HIV infected. So maybe 90% of us are infected with HIV. So the probability of picking a person who's HIV infected from Tanzania is really, really high. Why? Because most of us are infected with HIV. So the probability of you picking a HIV infected person will be higher, because most of us are HIV infected. So that was an example. So same applies here, because the bigger part of the brain is being supplied by the middle cerebral artery. The bigger part of the brain was supplied by the middle cerebral artery. So the probability that things will go wrong is high in the middle cerebral artery than any other arteries. I will take you back here. See, for example, so the middle cerebral artery supplies all the way from here to here. So the probability of finding this part being occluded is high than this one. I think you know what the probability is, and the probability means your number of event over number of sample size or something. So yeah, I mean that's roughly what I was implying here, right? Because the middle cerebral artery will supply the bigger part of the cerebral hemisphere, so the probability of finding a pathology in the middle cerebral artery is high, or the territories that are supplied by the middle cerebral artery is higher than any other parts of them, and any other arteries. Now, the middle cerebral artery, the infarction, death of tissues. The infarction along the territories of the middle cerebral artery can happen, along the superior division. So we can have infarction along the superior division of the middle cerebral artery. We can have infarction along the inferior division and the passage supply, the inferior division. And we can also have infarction along the lenticular side, the deep structures, the deep territories, and they all have different clinical presentation. They all have different clinical presentation. So the infarction along these deep territories, the deep structures of the middle cerebral artery, we call them lacunes. So we call them lacunes. So the lacunes is reserved for infarction that are occurring involving these deep penetrating arteries. But you know what? We can have. You said we can have along the superior division, inferior division, and these deep penetrating arteries. But we can have occlusion just before we give any branch of the middle cerebral artery. So assume we have something like broken somewhere around here. So just after it is formed, the middle cerebral artery, just after it is formed, just before it gives any other branch, we give something like occlusion. So this occlusion will affect all other parts distal to the middle cerebral artery. So the deep territories will be affected, the superior division will be affected, and the inferior division will be affected. And this is what we call the middle cerebral artery stem infarcts. The middle cerebral artery stem infarcts. So it affects the stem. It's like the stem. So the stem is like shina. So it affects the shina of the middle cerebral artery. So any other structure above, distal too. The middle distal to the occlusion will be affected. So now I think now we should relate the middle cerebral artery and these parts of the functional areas of the brain. Remember, we discussed about these functional areas multiple times. We know that we have the sensory motor here. So this is the primary motor area, and then this is primary somatosensory area. And we know they run within the precentral gyrus and the postcentral gyrus. We know that we have the Broca's area somewhere around here, and remember here is above the Sylvian fissure. So above the Sylvian fissure means this is in frontal lobe. So the Broca's area is in the frontal lobe, and remember we have the Wernicke's area on the superior temporal gyrus, which is just below the Sylvian fissure, and remember now we also have the optic radiation. You remember the visual pathway. You just have to watch the visual pathway, because I don't know how to make it sound important to you, but the superior part of the optic radiation will pass through the parietal lobe, but the inferior portions of the optic radiations will go through the temporal lobe. But we know that the extent of the middle cerebral artery will supply this part, the yellowish part here. So if you take this yellowish part here, it's like the middle cerebral artery will supply this part here. So if we have damage to the middle cerebral artery, depends on the branch affected, whether it's a middle cerebral artery stem infarct. So we have like all these parts affected, so depending on what branch is affected. But we also know that above the Sylvian fissure here, it is being taken care by the superior division of the middle cerebral artery, so the superior division. So if we affect the superior division of the middle cerebral artery, we'll have the clinical presentation, corresponding to these functional areas. The Broca's area will be affected in the superior division, and all the somatosensory areas. But if we have the inferior division affected, we know we have the Wernicke's area somewhere around here. We have the inferior portion of the optic radiation, and all this will be affected. And remember now the somatosensory and the primary motor areas. Remember the homunculus, like the face is represented more on the lateral side. But the legs and the lower limbs are found medial. So we know like the middle cerebral artery will supply the lateral surface, so we supply the arm and face. And this is why I told you like, the strokes mostly affect the face and the arms, because most of the stroke they occur in the middle cerebral artery territories, and then in the middle cerebral artery territories, we know we have the face, we have the legs, we have the face, we have the arms, and the part of the trunk, so the probability of you having the fascial and upper arm presentation is higher, because the artery affected the middle cerebral artery most of times, and most of the time the middle cerebral artery. I think now it makes sense to you. Okay, so having related the blood supply and the functional areas on the lateral surface of the cerebral hemisphere, what are the symptoms that we can have? What are the presentation that we can have? In this presentation, we call them the neurological deficit, So number one, are we surprised to have if someone has got an aphasia? Because we know like the Broca's area here is supplied by the superior division of the middle cerebral artery, and the Wernicke's area here is supplied by the inferior division of the middle cerebral artery. So we are not surprised if someone has got aphasia. Someone comes to your clinic with aphasia. So in terms of arteries, if you are thinking about arteries, the first artery to be suspected would be the middle cerebral artery. So it depends whether it's superior division, if that person has got the Broca's aphasia, for example, or inferior division if someone has got the Wernicke's aphasia. But it depends if you have the stem affection, the stem infarct, the middle cerebral artery stem. We know we have total aphasia. So total aphasia, we have total aphasia. So we are not surprised. Number two, the face, the arms is for motor loss. I mean, the loss of motor function of the face and the arm, like facial paralysis, and paralysis of one arm. It's no brainer, because we know the face and the arm are supplied by the middle cerebral artery, and to be specific, maybe the superior division of the middle cerebral artery. So that's no brainer. Also the sensation, no question about that. That's straight away. And then we can have face, arm, and leg. Now we can have face, arm, and leg. Why? Because you remember we have the branches that are going to supply the internal capsule, and you remember that the internal capsule there is somatosensory organization as well. So it depends on what part. So the middle cerebral artery can also affect the leg. Can also affect the leg. Because it supplies also the internal capsule. The middle cerebral also supplies the internal capsule through the reticulocyte arteries. But hemianopsia, are we surprised of hemianopsia? No, we are not surprised, because we know the middle cerebral artery will also supply the parts of the the optic radiation, parts of the temporal and parietal lobes, and they carry the optic radiation. But for you to be able to name which kind of hemianopsia is that, you need to know the visual pathway, and the video is there. You can go and watch it. So that there's no question about that, because we know the optic radiations are passing through here. And something very strange here is hemi-neglect. Hemi-neglect is like a person ignores fails to attend stimulus on one part of the body. Assume, for example, you are already, you are applying a makeup, and then you are applying perfect on the right side of your face. You are applying the makeup very, very correct, very, very perfect on the right side of the face, but you completely forget about the left side of your face. So it's like you are applying, it's like you don't know if you are left part of the body exists. So that's what is called hemi-neglect. So we have that's a separate discussion about hemi-neglect, but at least it's fair for you to know that infarction of the stroke along the middle cerebral artery will also result into hemi-neglect. You ignore one side of your body, even in a visual space, you tend to ignore one part of the visual space. So that's what is called the hemi-neglect. That's a separate discussion, and we'll have it next time. So we know also this. Infarction around here, we said we call them the lacunes, but these lacunes are more the lacunes are more prominent in hypertension. So in hypertension, these vessels, these small vessels, are prone to damage and infarction. So the lesion that are supplied by this they have infarction, and then this is so in hypertension, high blood pressure, these vessels are prone to rupture. So they are prone to rupture, and they can cause the intracerebral hemorrhage, the bleeding within the brain. So next time you see the stroke affecting the face and arm more than the leg, you think of the middle cerebral artery. And remember in the previous video I told you, if you see the stroke affecting more the legs, more the legs than the arms, you think of the anterior cerebral artery. But if you think now your stroke will affect more the face and arms more than the legs, you think of the middle cerebral artery. So this is not just anatomy, so it's clinical power. And if you found this video helpful, please like, share with a friend, and subscribe for more content like this. So next time we are going to discuss of the posterior cerebral artery, and see you next time.